I'm especially thrilled about today's program. This is a continuation of a discussion that began in March this year at the San Francisco International Asian American Film Festival, also called Present Future. And at that summit, we talked about the intersections of film with new media, television, and proposed new ways of thinking about artistic expression using all these kind of media and their convergence. And we had a discussion and kind of debates also about the possibilities. And we're really excited to bring two of the founders, media moderators, or the brains behind that summit, Karin Chen and Gary Chou. Karin is a very accomplished producer of such films that we've shown here, like Santa Mesa, The Motel, and Jack and Diana's coming out soon. Is that coming on?
Yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday. So be on the lookout for that. Gary Chou, among other things, he's also a producer of some SADAF favorites as well, like last year's Surrogate Valentine, which won the Grand Jury Award, and Daylight Savings, which is playing tomorrow afternoon right here. So I just want to introduce Karin Chen and Gary Chou.
Thanks, Brian. I really just wanted to take a minute to thank Leanne Kim and Brian Hu for allowing us to do this. You know, this is a conversation that started last year between Gary, myself, and Chi Wei Yang, who's the former head of the San Francisco International Asian American Film Festival. And you know, we've been having, the conversation really just came out of some questions that a lot of us are dealing with on a very personal level in the industry. And it culminated in March in a very kind of broad, wide-ranging discussion where we had tons of speakers. It was very ambitious. And, you know, Leanne was such an integral part of that conversation that we wanted to bring the conversation to this festival as well, but maybe do something more intimate and kind of drill down on some of the major issues and major questions and concerns that were brought up there. And I really want to thank Brian, who's been working with us for the past few months on programming, you know, the speakers and making this possible. So thanks, Brian. So the issues that we want to talk about today are issues I think that most of us who work in this industry think about on a day-to-day level. You know, and the number one question right now is sustainability, and it's about personal sustainability, and it's also about how is our industry going to sustain itself. And if any of you have been to film festivals in the last couple years, I mean, you've seen a panel about what the hell is happening to the film industry, you know, what's happening to media, how are we going to survive this shift to, you know, to digital platforms, you know, and I think the day-to-day reality is that in order to contend with a shrinking marketplace, the budgets have come down on a lot of these films, you know, and that means our paychecks and our fees have come down as well. You know, films that used to be made for $2 million are now made for $200,000 or $20,000. So it's not a financially sustainable model anymore. And to be honest, before when it was minimally financially sustainable, it was still very hard to sustain yourself emotionally and creatively, and it's a very tough industry. And you know, so as we're looking into, you know, we're talking about financial sustainability, I think the conversation is also really relevant in terms of emotional sustainability and creative sustainability. You know, when you're in a place where you can only make an independent film once every 5 years, how do you creatively sustain yourselves? You know, if you're in a place where you're an Asian American, maybe you have, you know, immigrant parents who don't like the fact that you work in entertainment, especially the independent side of entertainment. I mean, what do you do to keep yourself going on an emotional level, right? So these are all questions that I think everyone deals with on some level universally, but it doesn't necessarily come up as much. It's not as sexy to talk about always as how do you raise money and how do we sell a film and how do we get distribution. So one of the central premises that we're going to look at in this panel is going to be how we create sustainability. Sorry, that's my walkie. How do we create sustainability through cultivating audience? So I recently wrote an opinion piece in Filmmaker magazine. It's in this issue. And my thesis is that audience development is the key to sustaining ourselves as artists and also sustaining our industry. So we're going to talk about what that looks like and how that works.
Is that everything that you had written down on your piece of paper?
Pretty much.
Okay, wow. You didn't even look at it. I'm going to look at my notes, I'm sorry. So thank you for having me. I want to talk about a couple of things first before we got started. And just to set some context, as Karin and Chou and I were talking about how to focus this discussion, and one of the reasons why we decided to talk about audience sustainability, it came from looking at kind of what's happening at a macro level. And I think with media at a macro level, we are moving from a world where the experiences have been consumptive in nature to a world where the experiences are now participatory. And what that's caused is this shift where the attention and how people decide to spend their time, it's no longer something that's dictated by institutions or corporations. It's something that is controlled by individual people. Films and TV shows now compete for attention with video games and social networks and time spent on mobile devices. And so there's been kind of a huge amount of control that's been shifted out to the edges to individuals. The second thing is just this macro level structural shift from hierarchies to networks. Instead of trying to sell products by going and finding a buyer who can get you into a store, you now have networks like Etsy that allow individuals to buy and sell directly from each other. Instead of trying to find investors to raise money to make your thing, you can fundraise on Kickstarter. And instead of relying on kind of major media outlets to discover things, you now have social networks like Facebook and Twitter that let you engage directly with people. And so that shift has also affected how people create. I think for creators, the challenge has been that the old models are really only viable for large institutions and not the indies. And I think most of us in this room fall into the latter bucket. But at the same time, as technology has evolved, it's become a lot more powerful and a lot cheaper. And that's allowed for people to kind of start in a garage or to start very small and be very creative and think very creatively about creating new kinds of things as opposed to simply trying to optimize for an existing model. My day job is at a venture capital firm that invests in internet startups, and I think that one of the interesting stories that's come out of that has been the story of Twitter. Twitter was really kind of a product that started out as a utility, but there was something about audience that was relevant for the company too. They designed the product in such a way, almost probably unintentionally, that allowed for users to invent the @reply, the retweet, and the hashtag. And only after those took hold as emergent behaviors did the company actually productize them. And then those features over time eventually have led to Twitter's business model of selling promoted tweets, promoted trends, and promoted accounts. And so by opening up and allowing for the audience to come in, that has actually been a really huge factor in creating and allowing that company to be sustainable. And I think there are a lot of lessons there that we can apply as individual creators. So I think lastly, the truth is that no one has the answers, and we're kind of all figuring it out together. And that's kind of why we decided to invite a couple of our panelists here today who have kind of the courage to be living this in public, to be trying to figure it out themselves, and they're here to share their stories with us. So I want to introduce Patrick Epino and Stephen Dypiangco, who are the National Film Society. We have a quick video that we can use, and I'm going to hand this over to Patrick. If we could just play, let's play the Kickstarter video for about maybe the first 20 seconds. And what I really like about this is that I've known Patrick and Stephen for a while, and they started shooting videos in their bedroom, and as of a couple of weeks ago, they raised $50,000 on Kickstarter to fund a web series.
We don't have the same bedroom.
Yeah.
So
Not yet.
We're the National Film Society.
And we just got funded on Kickstarter! We're thrilled because we just raised over $54,000 on Kickstarter for our web series, Awesome Asian Bad Guys.
Thank you to all our supporters out there. We'd like to share with you our top 5 Kickstarter tips.
There's a lot of work that goes into launching and running
Can you guys
a
reenact
Kickstarter.
this right now?
So having a team in place to help you is really important. You're going to want people to help you write copy, create graphics, communicate to your supporters, help you do outreach.
No matter how cool your Kickstarter is, it's really hard to get people to spend money. So you really have to put yourself in their shoes and give them something that they would want. Create rewards that...
So this is a really odd video. So how did you guys get started?
Like as a National Film Society?
Yeah, I mean, this is a weird thing.
Right. No. So Steve and I we met at the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival in 2010, and we just got to talking, and we had like some similar interests in. Obviously, we have like filmmaking backgrounds, but we also had interest in like new media, online video, like audience building, all that other kind of stuff. And so, after maybe about a year or so, we decided to kind of collaborate on something, and we had a couple different ideas, and it became that. So we've been doing it for about a little over a year.
So, one of the things, I remember when, I know Patrick is a filmmaker first, what is it that you're doing? I mean, it seems like a bit of just funny videos on YouTube in a way. Like, how did this evolve? Like, did you imagine that this is what you wanted to do?
One of the things we heard from somebody when we were starting out to sort of be successful on YouTube was to focus on the you part of it. And since we're both filmmakers, we always talk about filmmaking and movies to some extent, but this is also, we get to show a different side of ourselves than that includes pouring colored soda on each other in slow motion.
Right, and like on that tip, it's like for a long time, as for filmmakers, it's always about kind of being behind the camera and being behind the scenes. And at a certain point, you would see like, oh, how can we do something that other people do, like illustrators or musicians and stuff, and like kind of put yourself in front of the lens a little bit, and so make it about like who you are. Like I've said this before, it's like you see with films, it's like. And with like musicians, say you like a band on Facebook, you don't see like a new like Facebook page for every album they create. So it's like, with filmmakers, you would see something that was like, oh, follow my film, and then like my next film, and then like my next film after that, and so it's kind of like this disparate like audience,
This is a very different set of behaviors or tactics that you guys are taking that is not typically associated, or maybe not necessarily what you learned in film school. In a way, you're kind of also undergoing a bit of an identity shift of what it means to be, typically a classic creator as opposed to what it means to be a creator in 2012. How's that identity shift been for you guys?
Awesome.
I think it was interesting because we didn't learn any of this stuff in film school. We both went to film school, and I think that was part of the attraction to learn it. It's like, oh, I didn't know about any of these opportunities before. Let me find out about it, because there's a lot of people out there who are way more talented than I am, and who just like would never consider doing anything like this, And it's only a matter of time before, going online and creating opportunities for yourself becomes more popular. So I thought, hey, let's get online and try this out and see where this goes before everybody else does.
So let's talk about that. So a couple of weeks ago, you guys completed a Kickstarter project to raise $54,000. How did that project come about? And maybe what are some of the things that you learned going through that experience?
So we came up with this video about a little over a year ago, or around a year ago, called Awesome Asian Bad Guys. And it was us talking about all those dudes in the 80s and 90s in action movies that would, the Asian bad guy that would always get killed, and kind of just highlighting them. And then earlier this year, we kind of decided to, hey, like let's make something, because for almost a year we've just been making these videos of just us. So let's make something where we actually get to show our chops. So we decided to kind of push forward with that. We got some cool people on board. And then we decided to do the Kickstarter, and that was super stressful, man.
And it was really actually because CAM, the Center for Asian American Media, put out a call for, they had money for a web series, and they were putting out $20,000, and we thought, we'd like $20,000, and so we said, well, what ideas do we have? Well,
we have an Asian idea.
We have an Asian idea, so then that actually was a big motivator to put a package together. And then we asked Phil Yu to be involved with the project, and he signed on. And then when we had Phil, we were like, oh, I guess we better make this now. and so the whole time it was like, okay, if we get the money from Cam, we're gonna launch a Kickstarter to raise the rest of the budget. If we don't get the money from Cam, we'll launch a Kickstarter to raise the whole budget. And then at a certain point, it's like, well, let's just raise the whole budget anyway, and we'll have more control.
So, Patrick, you're saying that it was stressful. I mean, what were some of the most stressful parts of it?
Because it's like you think, oh, I'm just going to do this like fundraising thing. It just becomes a side thing, but it's actually its own separate entity. You know, I mean, Steve did a lot of work actually researching a lot of, Kickstarters. We both looked at Kickstarters, figuring out like what the rewards would be, figuring out how much we would actually reasonably ask for, because you're like, oh, we can do it for this much, or we could do it for that much, and then, this being our first one, we're like, okay, let's just go for it. And because Kickstarter is it's an all or nothing platform, you're just kind of sitting there. And then, as you told us, before, and other people have told us, it's like it starts off strong, and then it just kind of dips, and then it goes like this. And this whole dip area is really, it's such a public thing, and you're like asking for people to like contribute to a project, and it's just constantly. We were asking for 50 grand, and like we had 12 like a week before, and that didn't really look promising, But then in the end, it worked out.
What were some, you shared some of the lessons here on how to run a Kickstarter project, but how has the success of this project maybe evolved your thinking about what the National Film Society is and what you hope to do in the future? In a lot of ways, in the conversations that we've had, I've talked about what you guys do as really performance art, more so than anything else. So has this helped validate who you are? Has this helped encourage you to think of ways of pursuing things independently?
I think it's affected our outlook on ourselves and our future in a couple different ways. One is that when we were in the middle of the Kickstarter, and there were a few people who came on early, supporting us, and one of the best things that you can do when you're running a Kickstarter is really post updates about your progress, and that goes out to all the people who are backing you already. And it got us in the habit of telling our story on a regular basis and keeping people updated on our progress. And I think that was a very valuable lesson that we hope to continue for the many years to come in the future, because that's sort of what people are interested in is following our story. And then the second thing that was exciting was that, when we came up with this idea, it's called Awesome Asian Bad Guys, and we're like, we have no idea if anybody's really going to like this or not. And when we hit our goal and we got over 800 people to pledge their support to this project, it gave us this boost of confidence, saying, hey, we can come up with ideas and get people to support us. And so it was such a big boost in terms of exposure too. We said, hey, let's continue to develop more ideas like this that we feel have some sort of marketability and can reach a large audience.
Yeah, and also it's like, so again, this is the first, it's a non-just weekly YouTube video that we're doing together. And I think like that's exciting for us. And then also it's like, we didn't just kind of, like, we didn't really predict this like a year ago. We didn't plan on this per se, but we always knew we wanted to do more and kind of get back into the narrative, just kind of content creation beyond just like weekly stare in front of the camera, sit in front of the camera, stare at it videos. And so this allows us to kind of shift that perspective and be like, oh, okay, we're making something, and let's figure out something else to make after this, and kind of be, look at different platforms, whether it be online, whether it be like pushing for something possibly on television, or even going back to features and stuff like that, and just kind of knowing that that people responded once, and if we do well, then maybe they'll respond again.
You know, what I kind of really admire about what you've done is that you're, on the one hand, someone could criticize what you're doing and saying you don't know what you're doing, you don't have a plan, none of this was architected from the beginning. But I actually think that because you're not trying to architect this from the beginning, because you're enabling the audience to come in, because you're kind of adjusting on the fly, this has a much more organic feel than, say, a web series that was produced by a large corporation that is being pushed out to all of these channels. There's this tension of, you know, not just within the project, but within what you're doing of will you make it or will you not make it? And that flies in the face, I think, of what we are comfortable with, right? We want to know that there's, you know, someone who's going to buy our film at this festival and then going to put it out into distribution. And so the scope of what we have to worry about has changed quite a bit. You're taking on more responsibility from an emotional standpoint too, as creators. You know, are you comfortable with that? You know, are you looking for ways to bolster what you're doing with other types of business opportunities or things that are more traditional, or would you say that you're kind of understanding the power of what it means to embrace that uncertainty and running with that?
I think it's both. I think that on one hand, we would love to make money because we're not really making any money right now. So money would be good. And so therefore we're like exploring options like developing projects that we think would, you know, be suitable for television, because it seems like there would possibly be more money in television than there currently is to fund like online content. But at the same time, when, you know, right now we're part of, we work with PBS. And so when we started making these videos, PBS contacted us a month after we started. And when we started, we had no idea that PBS was looking for something like us to, you know, associate with. And so I think that was a good lesson in that, like, you know, having some faith in like doing what you believe in and what you're passionate about, and then it's working out. So there's a mix of like, hey, how can we, you know, figure out how we can sustain ourselves doing this financially, you know, looking at perhaps offline options, but then also, you know, just trusting that things have been moving in the right direction all along, and hopefully they'll continue to.
Right, and to the in terms of it being organic, it's like Steve and I kind of had a plan, but it constantly shifts, you know, and that's the beauty of, I mean, that's why I love it so much, because in the world of like making a feature, it just becomes, you know, this huge albatross around your neck to some extent, and it's like it takes forever. And for this, it's like weekly, like we can shift, you know, like something else comes up, we could try something else. And like I said, we didn't plan on shooting or trying to fundraise for Awesome Asian Bad Guys when we came up with the video. It was just something that kind of like organically happened, and there's a very like nice fluidity, and it's such a light operation, you know what I mean? And that's what kind of makes it constantly fun.
Sheryl Sandberg, who's the CEO of Facebook, has a great quote about how she doesn't like to try to plan. And one of the reasons is that, or plan too far ahead, and one of the reasons why she doesn't like to do that is because she says that she won't know what the potential options that she has before her until she gets to these points. And I think that, you know, embracing that concept is pretty critical to anyone who is trying to create a new form. But part of your ability to move and adjust and to figure out the plan on the fly comes from the fact that you guys are both trained in a variety of different disciplines that you're bringing to bear. I mean, can you talk a bit about your backgrounds and maybe some of the skills that you've had that have, you know, become seemingly useful, you know, in almost a surprising way?
Yeah, I mean, we both went to film school, and I think also just maybe a comfort with on my end, like I didn't realize that I was sort of like an early adopter in some ways. I mean, I put my first video on YouTube on like 2006, and when, you know, my classmates in film school weren't really feeling comfortable putting anything up there yet. And then I had the fortune of working with a filmmaker named John Reese, who talked a lot about marketing and distribution for independent films, and that taught me a lot about marketing and building audience. And like again, I had like a Facebook page for my like short film in 2007, and so I think like those experiences, you know, sort of trying things out on a small scale, ultimately helped us. You know, that was some of the stuff I was able to bring to this partnership.
Yeah, and I've like when I was trying to push my first feature out a few years ago, like I was constantly trying to figure out a way to do things like on my own. Like I have a design and web developing background, so like a lot of that stuff that comes into play with what we do as well. Like you know, you don't have to go to somebody else, and we just kind of cover all those bases. And then again, like actually that John Reese fellow that Steve mentioned, when we met at the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival in 2010, it was because I was reading that book, and then he mentioned that to me, and that's how we actually started having this conversation about like you know, self-distribution, audience, like online stuff, and everything that I kind of, I mean, I love that idea. I wanted to get around all the typical gatekeepers, you know, like I love film festivals, but like to a certain extent as a filmmaker, you don't want to be kind of at the mercy of their approval. I think filmmakers inherently, independents, you know, like they have like this old school reputation of being like these kinds of brash visionaries, but deep down, like every filmmaker that I've ever known is really, really like, they need that affirmation from other people, especially film festivals. They need those laurels, they need all that stuff. And so I was always kind of trying to find a way around that. And so like, I think, you know, like that's that mindset, like when I met Steve, kind of fed into just a new, trying to think of other stuff to do.
Well, I mean, to continue with that thought, the fact that you guys have found success together is largely, I think, due to the support that you guys provide for each other too. I mean, not to get
lots of hugs.
Not, to but I think that affirmation and validation are important things for creators broadly, right? You guys get that by working with each other, and then you also, I think, largely got that from having a successful Kickstarter project too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we sometimes send each other high fives on Twitter. We'll just be like, high five. So it's nice. It's nice. I mean, I'm married. My wife is supportive, but she also doesn't want to hear about every little detail, like all the time. And so I can talk to Patrick about this all day, and it's great.
Yeah, I don't want to hear it all the time either. No. Yeah, like in all honesty, it's the most fun. Like working with Steve is doing this stuff is like the most fun I've had since I was a kid. I mean, like literally, like it's just kind of, we talk about movies, we talk about 80s, 90s pop culture nostalgia, we talk about sports, and you know, it's fun, and we have like similar sensibilities in terms of humor.
So taking the discussion and looking forward, what are the things that you're most hopeful about, and also what are the things that are the most important for you think to get right, you think?
I mean, I think in terms of hopeful, I think that just how far we've come in the past year, and you know, knowing that we're committed to this for the long haul, and that we have a really strong base of supporters, both who we know and who we don't know, who are rooting for us, and it feels like with great people on our side that we can, you know, that the sky's the limit for us. In terms of not getting anything wrong, I'll let Patrick.
Well, actually, just before we move on to that point, though, you had shared a statistic with me regarding, you know, your analysis of your Kickstarter backers.
Right. Yeah, there was something like we looked at the people who pledged to our Kickstarter, and it was something like just around 40% of the money came from people we knew. So it was like roughly 60% came from people we didn't know, which was just exciting, knowing that most of the money came from strangers, which is awesome.
First question.
Hopeful, and what are the things that you think that you need to get right?
Hopeful. I mean, that we just get to keep making stuff, and like in the end, it's kind of idealistic, but like to say, it's about the work, and like it's not about being precious about it, but it's like we just want to make good stuff and have fun, and kind of just continue like building what we're doing, and just meeting more folks, like it's different, at least for me. To some extent, it's like from the when you make like from regular film, it's like it's such a zero-sum game sometimes. It's like either you're in this festival or you're out, or either you get a distributor or you don't. And with like what we've been finding so far with like online and new media stuff is like it's not. People are super nice and super like helpful, and they want to collaborate with you. It's not about like, oh, if I collaborate with you, you're going to take away from me. Like it's just a different breed, and it kind of like it's just a different vibe to it.
Well, in a way, it's almost like I talked a bit about how the experience for consumers is going from being consumptive to participatory, and you're talking about how this is actually bleeding over a little bit to the creative process. The creative process you're finding is a lot more participatory in this vein versus in kind of the more purist filmmaker sense, and that's evolved too. So, do you? I guess when you see people who that's a bit of a loaded question. I'm not going to go there, but I am kind of curious. You feel that with the work that you've done to date, that this is opening up new creative possibilities that didn't exist before for you?
Absolutely. I mean, it felt like it's so you sort of know as a filmmaker the steps to take. It's like make a film, get to Sundance, write a feature, have it bought, have it made, things like that. I was working on a documentary that I started in 2006, and I still haven't finished, a feature documentary. And I would love PBS to be involved, have it play on POV or something like that. And it's like, it's so there's everybody's going through the same front door, through the same channels, and what we've found is by kind of going our own way, we're able to kind of go in the back door and start working with people different ways. Yes.
Yeah, that's our motto in the back door.
National Film Society. Going through the back door.
The back door.
That was supposed to be in-house.
So one kind of just thought to close on, which is, how has your level of comfort with the uncertainty changed since you began?
The uncertainty of just like career stuff, and I like it more. It's always like the constant evolution of it. It's exciting. It fits like the shorter attention span I have as I get older, and like it feels like something. It's all going in a net positive direction, as opposed to like something that's static and stagnant, which in all honesty is kind of where we were before when we met.
Yeah, when we started, it was like when we met each other, it just seemed like we were both kind of stuck in our careers. And when we were just preparing to launch, we had an idea, we will know in a few months whether or not this is any good or if people just hate it and we should stop. And luckily, all signs have been pointing towards keep going. It's working out. I wish it were faster, in some ways, but things feel like they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, the only certainty before we did this was like that we weren't doing jack.
Right, and so what did you have to lose at that point?
Exactly.
Well, I think it's been really exciting, and I think seeing you as you've gone and gotten the validation. I think getting to Sundance was a big moment for you guys. I think getting the PBS deal was a big deal for you guys. I think having the kind of audacity to do this project in the first place was a big thing, and it's been great to see that get validated as well. So we have a few minutes to take questions from the audience, and I can't see very well, but are there any questions out there? Yes, right there.
In a group of friends at school, we're going to be filming something and putting it on the internet. How would you say it would be a good way to get a public view out there?
So what's the best way, if you're going to put something on the internet, what are some of the best ways to get a view out of that?
I wish we knew.
We don't get a lot of views for our videos. What's your video gonna be?
It's gonna be a video of like 100 kids dancing in Gangnam Style.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'd watch that. Can we be in it?
I think a couple of things to kind of keep in mind is, so like getting the word out to like blogs and other people who will watch it and share it is important. It's like when you're on Facebook and somebody a couple of your friends share it, you're more likely to watch it than if only one person shares it. So getting all 100 of those people to share it and asking them to ask all of their friends and family to share it will be a good way to, I think, you could do. Also, like thinking about when you're on YouTube, making sure you're just putting the right tags in there for, the song and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, right here.
Were you able to figure out a way to get some information like demographics of the people that were contributing to you? Where around the world they're coming from?
Yeah, because we send out surveys to send out these T-shirts to those who got T-shirts and stuff, and so it was interesting. Yeah, it's we haven't broken it down yet, but yeah, it's definitely all around the country, and a few from internationally like Australia, the UK, Germany,
All the way from
Canada. So yeah, it's super exciting because like when we look at our like let's say Facebook analytics and it'll say, most of our fans are either like in Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York. But it was cool to see like people, supporting us from like Virginia and other places where we might not really know people.
Yes.
I love your guys' work. I remember you talking about Cam and 20 grand, and you mentioned that, when we raise our whole budget for more control, can you talk about the issues of control in between Cam or national public vision and stuff?
We didn't get the money from Cam, so they have no control over us.
Well, I think when we were debating, whether or not to just start the Kickstarter on our own, it was like Cam's part of getting the money was that they would release it. And we knew that this is an action comedy and it's maybe not typically the sort of thing that Cam would really, release normally. We thought, what is the right home for this project ultimately? And if we just, either, take control and get the money ourselves and make it, we can either release it ourselves or find the right partner, to make this make a big a splash as possible.
Yeah, I mean, like with anything else, if they give you money, like they have a say, and they would have had like rights to it for a year, like exclusive or something like that. I don't know.
I think, the other thing, just to add on to that, I think the more you can control your rights, I think the better, because so much is changing in the landscape of how people find and engage in and even buy content that you want to make sure that you've got full control over that. Yes?
When are you guys going to release the series?
2018.
We're going to start shooting in January, and, May is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. That might be a good time to release it. So we'll see. We're still talking to different distributors and finding the right partner to possibly work with to release it online.
Any other questions? Great. Well, let's move into the second part.
Okay. Thought we were just passing down.
I wanted to just kind of piggyback on a lot of the themes that was brought up in that conversation. And, I think one thing that's really scary for creators is that John Reese's book is pretty scary for a lot of creators. And he's this guy who made a film and he put it out and he did all these things that got it out and he got a lot of attention. And then now he goes around the country in some ways proselytizing about how you as a filmmaker should get your work out there. And a lot of filmmakers are like, oh my God, I know how to write a script and I know how to direct my actors and I know how to, get the film to completion and the music and the sound and the editing, and now I have to know how to promote myself and, set up, accounts on Facebook and Twitter and do all the social media stuff. I mean, it's very scary for a lot of creators, honestly. And I work with media makers who will never do any of that. I mean, the filmmakers behind Jack and Diane, So Young Kim and Bradley Russ Gray, I think hell will freeze over before they ever send a tweet. I just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, they're so comfortable with the gatekeeper path that you guys talked about, which is get your film. The first gatekeeper is your festival programmer. Then it's your acquisition executive at a major distributor. Then it's the newspaper critics, and so on and so forth. So it's like they would much rather just keep going through that gatekeeper path. The thing is, when those gates don't open for you, if there's a chance that they don't open for you, then you're kind of, you've painted yourself into a corner. So I would say that there's a lot of middle ground between what John Reese is talking about and, what filmmakers who just want to walk the gatekeeper path do. And, one of the reasons we invited 3 different speakers on this panel is because I think they represent 3 different ways of going about it. And for every person out there, I mean, you kind of, in a way, what you guys are talking about, it has to be organic. You have to find a way that's fun for you and makes sense and does not scare the living daylights out of you to send a tweet or to set yourself up on social media in some way. So I wanted to turn to Lynn Chen, who really I think needs no introduction, who is in half of the feature films at this festival this year, and who we are all fans of and have followed your work for a long time. And I met Lynn as an actress in the indie film community, in the Asian American film community, but then I started to follow her in a different way, which is through her blog. And I just found it so fascinating, the work that Lynn was putting out there, mainly because, number one, I think Lynn has probably the toughest job in the business, which is being an Asian American actress in Los Angeles. I mean, it's tough, emotionally, spiritually, creatively. It's a very difficult place to be and to kind of confront that reality on a day-to-day level where the opportunities are scarce. And I was thinking about this when I was holding auditions, and almost every Asian American actress walked through the door. And I was just like, oh my God. I mean, their lives are very tough in a way that's almost like the flip side of the coin of what my life is. And as a producer, I think we deal with a very different perception of what's in our control. As an actor, you kind of have this perception that a lot is not in your control. You don't make the hiring decisions. A lot of the times you're hired based on the way you look, which is, not in a lot of ways not in your control. And actors do try to control certain parts of that. And I think that as a producer, we're told the opposite, which is everything is in our control. So if something doesn't happen on a film, it ultimately is laid at our feet. So we have the control to raise the financing, to sell the film, to attach the actors, to develop the story well, to get the film through the gatekeepers. So we are dealing with almost the opposite side of what that means, and I think that that's also tough in its own way, because if your film doesn't succeed, if you get your film financed and you get it developed well and you get the actors attached and you get it made and you get it into Sundance and you don't sell it, if you don't do that last part after doing everything else, most of the industry will consider it like you just didn't make that film. It's like a blank mark on your CV or resume. So, last weekend, I was at a panel at the VC C3 conference, and it was called Breaking Down the Wall. And someone in the audience said, well, you keep hitting this wall day after day. People say no for whatever reason. Whatever you're trying to do, get money or get distribution. What happens? How do you break through that wall? And my answer was, my key is I just don't take things personally. I just keep it moving. And I learned this from reading this book called Hello, He Lied by Linda Obst, who's a female producer in Hollywood. And she said, a great lesson she learned from a studio head was the lesson of next, which means, okay, that didn't work, we failed, let's move on to the next thing. But I think that that's easier to do as a producer, where I can separate myself from the project that I'm working on. And I'm wondering, as an actor, for example, is it possible not to take rejection personally, and to move on in that way? Like, how are the ways that you deal with what your realities are?
Yeah, I like that next thing. I definitely took things personally, and I think that that's a natural reaction, especially when you're first starting in the industry. I have been performing since I can remember performing. My mother was an opera singer at the Metropolitan Opera House, so that's where I made my stage debut at age 5, and was a member of the children's chorus, and was just getting handed roles left and right because there were no, at the time, young Asian actors. And so I would just book everything. And then one day I said to my parents when I was 10 years old, like, I just want to play kickball after school. I just want to be a normal kid. And they said, that's fine. And then I got bitten by the bug when I was 16 and was like, I want to act again. And I went and I got my first rejection. I was like, I hate this. And I went to college, and I was going to major in theater, and I was told, like, right away, freshmen don't get cast in plays. And I was like, screw this. I did not handle rejection well at all because I had grown up, you know, having it handed over to me. And so I ended up majoring in music and women's studies, and then when I graduated, I tried acting again, and was a waitress and was like, this is horrible, and was getting rejected again. So I stopped again, and I just didn't know that that was just a way of life. I just assumed, because I had learned at such a young age that it was just handed to me, that I thought that that's what it was going to be like. Fast forward a few years after doing a desk job for 2 years right out of college and hating every second of it, I had saved enough money to say, okay, I'm going to give acting my all for a year, because that's what I have saved. I'm not going to be a waitress because I'm horrible at it. And that year, after a few months, of rejection, which I felt like I was able to handle a little bit, I booked my first job, which was on Law & Order. And then right after that, I booked another Law & Order, and then another Law & Order. That's what happens when you're in New York. And then I joined SAG, and then a few years later, you know, I just learned to ride that roller coaster a little bit. But there were definitely years where the rejection was affecting me personally. And if anyone's read my blog, you would know that the main way it manifested itself was with an eating disorder. So I, you know, thought that the reason that I wasn't getting cast was because of the way I looked, because the first feature film I did, I played a ballet dancer, so I had to lose a lot of weight for it. And that's how I was introduced to the world. And then when I naturally gained the weight back, just everyone, from relatives to the press to fans to agents to managers, everyone kept saying to me, you know, it'd be a lot better if you looked like you did in that movie. So yeah, like it was a lot of me personalizing that and thinking I could control what was going on with the rejection. Whereas fast forward, you know, now it's 2012, that was 2005, I'm recovered, and now a spokesperson for the National Eating Disorders Association. And, you know, I've really learned to not take rejection personally. I am this, you know, I'm now the same size as I was in that movie, and I have the same problems that I did, and I see that I had the same problems that I did when I was like 30 pounds heavier, and people were telling me that, you know, that was the reason why I wasn't booking. So, yeah.
So, I mean, it's brutal daily reality. I mean, people may yell at me and curse at me, but it's not like they're attacking my weight constantly. Right. That's tough. I mean, how do you get through that? And, you know, I'd love for you to talk a bit about how you started blogging, why you started the blog. I mean, it's obviously a very personal issue. We also have some pages up from the blog on the tabs. So if you want to, in a second, so if you want to show any of the pages from your blog, I can walk you the projection booth.
Well, yeah, you can just if you go to theactorsdiet.com right now, you can see that that I already blogged this morning about last night and what I ate, because, well, no, that's not the blog. This is just an about me that links to like my 40,000 things. That's one of my blogs. Okay, so it's just if you go to, can you go to theactorsdiet.com, just like a regular?
Could you type in www.actorsdiet.com?
The Actors Diet.
The Actors Diet.
Because actorsdiet.com is a car thing. I didn't get on that domain right away. And this blog was started 4 years ago almost. So see, that was me last night. And if you scroll down, you'll see everything I ate. So if you just scroll down, that was last night's screening. And so it's more than just what I'm eating, but it's a way for me to show what's going on in my life, especially when I'm working. Keep scrolling, you'll see the food, because that's what it's about. We went to Applebee's. It was my first time. And there's some of the food. And then I always show how much of it I eat, because the main thing for me was, the reason I started the blog was because I was dropped by both my agent and my manager on the same day. And that was very tough to hear. This was 4 years ago. And I just felt like I needed to take a year off from acting and get my eating disorder under control. And I wanted to see what it was like if I did that in a way that was very public, because I had nothing to lose. I had nobody whispering in my ear, don't do that. And I honestly thought it was going to be career suicide to say out loud, I have an eating disorder and I don't really know how to fix this, because I feel like a lot of actresses and a lot of actors have come out with eating disorders, but then they're like, that was years ago and I'm fine now. And nobody talks about it day to day. And at the same time, I was very obsessed with food. So I was reading a lot of food blogs, so I thought, I'm going to give this a try. And initially when I first started, I was doing it with another woman who was a nutritionist, my best friend, Christy Myers. And we were doing it together. And she really hated it. She was always like, I don't want to be blogging about what I eat, because you always hear about people being like, I don't care that you ate an apple today, I don't care, But for me, it was important because that's the blog I needed to see when I was in recovery. I needed to see, because when I read Scarlett Johansson was eating a burger, I was like, she's not eating a burger every day. I know she's not. What is she eating the next day? She's probably eating an apple. But she's not going to talk about that, because then everyone's going to be like anorexic. So I wanted to show the balance of the day-to-day, and it just grew into this thing from a daily food journal into a way for me to be part of not only a community of bloggers and food bloggers, but also all these this way of interacting with my audience, and also talking to people in the industry about things that had nothing to do with self-promotion, but also talking about food, which everyone has to do. Everyone has to eat. So, if I'm sitting next to a big director, I'm not like, I'm an actress. I will be taking pictures of my food and they'll be like, what the hell are you doing? And then I will say, I have a blog and it's called The Actors Diet, and they know I'm an actress from there.
And how long have you been doing this blog? When did you start it?
I started almost 4 years ago, so it's been almost 4 years.
4 years. And how often do you blog?
Twice a day.
Wow, twice a day.
Mm-hmm. I blog more than anyone I know. Most food bloggers do not do this. And for me, it's almost become like a form of therapy. It feels weird if I don't do it now at this point. There's been many times in my life where I think to myself, I don't need to do it, but when I don't do it, it feels weird. So I keep doing it. I'll keep doing it until it feels really weird, I guess.
And I'm curious, how did your audience discover your blog? Do you see your audience that watches your films and reads your blog as the same demographic, the same kind of group of people? Do you see it overlapped? Are are you able to kind of track how your audience has grown?
I don't really pay attention to numbers or demographics intentionally, because I feel like that's not the way I wanted to approach the blog to begin with. But I'm always, surprised whenever I do hear from people or meet people in person who are introduced to me through the blog. And then there's also people who know me from movies and stuff who also read the blog. And it's really nice to be able to interact with them in that way and have a back and forth, because in the past it's always been like they know about me, but I don't know anything about them. And so when somebody leaves a comment and says like, I had pork chops for dinner last night too, and then I meet them, we can talk about pork chops. It's very exciting.
So it kind of feeds into each other, both aspects.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm curious, has blogging impacted your career as an actor? Does it interfere with it, or does it inform your work as an actor?
Like when I said, I started, I thought it was going to be career suicide, and if anything, it's really, I feel like, opened a lot of doors for me. I've been introduced to a lot of aspects of the food world that I never really thought were possible, like emceeing events and that sort of thing, making videos with people who I just find are very interesting, like, and going to their house and cooking, and I find that it's like just a really, really fun hobby, and I intentionally try not to monetize or use it as a career booster, but if it has opened doors for me, I won't deny that, and that's been a really nice bonus, but it's not the reason why I do it.
So you talked a lot about how you started the blog for emotional sustainability, in a way, to deal with something that you were going through, which was really tough. And now you continue to do it twice a day. So, and the one thing that I love about your blog is your voice in the blog. And it's very, even just the design of it, the way you talk to the readers, it's incredibly accessible. And so I can just kind of jump in there, start reading any post, and feel like I'm reading something from a friend of mine, so there's a really great, easy connection. And I just wonder if you would talk about if you came up with that voice. Was it intentional? Did you just start writing? How did you decide to include all the photographs? And what is your I guess what I'm asking is how do you approach the blog creatively, and does it sustain yourself creatively when you're not acting, because you're not acting every day, right?
No. The reason why I wanted to start the blog is because I wanted a creative outlet so that I would have something to do during downtime. I've always been obsessed with what actors do, what anyone in this industry does when they're not actually working, because so much of it is a lot about downtime. I used to have a podcast called Actors Off about what actors do when they're not working. And what I found was that the very experienced veteran actors would always say, like, I would always ask the same questions, and one of them was, what's the longest you've gone without a paying gig? And the people who have been in this industry for years would be like, oh, not that long, 6 months. And the newbies would always be like, it's been 2 months. This is horrible. Like, they felt like they would never work again. And I just realized, it's just normal. It's just normal to have like a 6 to 2.5 year hiatus, and it's okay, because I'm watching, like, this person with a lot of longevity in their career say that that's okay. So for me, starting the blog was a great way to start taking photographs, write. It did take me a while to find my voice. Initially, I was like talking about nutritional content and how the slow food movement and all these different things. And then after a while, it just got boring to me. I used to talk about my eating disorder a lot more, and that to me became very draining. It was a wonderful way to talk to people and know that I was impacting people's lives and hearing from readers talk about their stories. But that in and of itself became very emotionally draining. And the reason why I'm able to do 2 posts a day is because it's all just very picture heavy with commentary, and it doesn't take me very long to do it all. So that's why I keep doing it. But if it took me, like sometimes I'm asked to guest post or do something for a larger site where they would actually pay me, and but for me, that's not why I do it. I'm not really a writer. even though I enjoy doing it for the blog. I guess it's because I don't have anyone to answer to. And once you have somebody to answer to, then you have responsibility. And for me, I am first and foremost an actress. So that's what I put all my energy into. And so for me, this has always just been like a hobby that sort of found its way into my life, and I enjoy it very much. And it does scratch that creative itch a little bit. But if I don't have time for it, I don't have to make it anything more than it is. And if I do have time, I will make something, like I'll make a video, or I'll like make a very special cake that will take 2 days, to post about. So that doesn't happen that often, though. Don't want to paint myself as a baker. I'm not.
And I'm curious, it's interesting that it started and has grown organically, and you also now have 2 other blogs, right? Can you talk about those, why you started them, and if they provide kind of the same satisfaction?
Yeah, it's interesting because now I feel like I use blogging as like my I guess my outlet. So the other blog that I started a year and a half ago with Lisa Lee. It is a blog called Thick Dumpling Skin, and it started because I heard Lisa Lee talking about her struggles with food and culture specifically on NPR. And when I heard her talking, I realized just how much this whole body image, food thing stems from our culture as Asian Americans. And nobody was talking about it. I kept looking up resources. I couldn't find one that was specifically about this. So I found out we had like 40 Facebook friends in common. I friended her. We started talking. We were like, what should we do? Should we make a documentary? Should we write a book? And then I realized, the easiest thing is just to do a blog. So we started the blog. It became a community forum. It's a place for Asian Americans to go and talk about their quest for the perfect body. And we just realized from the outpouring of submissions that a lot of people have this struggle. So so that's why we started that. And then and I just oversee it because, like I said, it's really talking about eating disorders, body image, all that kind of stuff is just really emotionally draining, and not something that you just are willing to talk about every single day unless you're like a professional therapist, I think. And even for them, it's difficult. So for me, it was a lot about, just having an outlet there because it is a part of my life, but not having to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. And then the other blog I started was a blog called Morning Music. It was for my father, who passed away just a few months ago. And for me, it was because I was listening to a lot of music, because like I said, I grew up in the Metropolitan Opera House, and so my father and my family listened to a lot of classical music, and I was just listening to music as a way to mourn my dad with my brother. We would just be like, oh, I'm listening to this opera. What are you listening to today? And then it was a way for me to keep in touch with my brother, but at the same time, honor my father and think about him and share beautiful music. And so what's interesting is with those other 2 blogs, aside from, the Actor's Diet, I feel like is like a very personal, like day-to-day thing. But those 2 are just sort of like when I really want to get deep, I guess, and really share. It's mostly for other people. It's not really for myself as much.
Okay, great. I want to just check in with the audience and see if anyone has questions for Lynn. Especially if there are readers of her blog or people who blog themselves out there. Be interesting to hear from you guys. Well, everyone's too shy, I think, to ask Lynn a question.
You can ask me what the best places to eat in LA. Oh, I don't know San Diego very well, but I do have a favorite place in San Diego.
You said you blog twice a day, right? So do you blog like in public on your phone sometimes?
I can use a blogging platform on my phone called iBlogger, I believe it's called. But it's really easy. As long as there's Wi-Fi, it's pretty easy to just slap up a post. I use a third-party blogging platform called Ecto. And if you have Windows, you're very lucky because there's a free blogging platform called Windows Live Writer. but that doesn't exist for Macs. But that's good for if you have very photo-heavy posts like mine, because if you are on WordPress, which I am on, or Blogger, it just takes forever to upload 1,000 pictures. That's not fun. So I use Ecto. It's very easy. But yeah, if I'm on the road, sometimes I'll just like blog from my phone, and it's pretty easy. And then I can just do it from my iPhone. It'll post wherever. I'm about to go on tour in Europe to sing in a punk band called Edie Sedgwick. And I have no idea what's going to happen there because I don't know what the Wi-Fi situation is, or, like I'm also like kind of scared that like everything's going to get stolen because we're going to be in some unsavory places. But we'll see what happens. It'll be an adventure.
You could have also gone the way with something sensitive, the eating disorder, of being an anonymous blogger versus, and you would have received kind of a different audience and different responses. So, I mean, I wonder if you thought about that.
Yeah, there are a lot of anonymous eating disorder blogs, and actually I did back in the day, way back in the day, before I started this blog, when I was acting, I started a blog called Letters to My Body, which was it's the first time I'm talking about it. I'm outing myself. It was called Letters to My Body, and it was like a love letter to a different part of my body, like my toes or my ears or whatever, and what I appreciated about it. It was completely anonymous, and I hated it because there was like no interaction. I couldn't like promote it. I couldn't like talk to people, and I think that that's such a part of being an actor. You need audience response, and that was something that I was surprised I got so much out of like just hearing comments from people, and like when I actually met people, interacting with them. So that's a reason why I wanted to start it. But another thing that I found really surprisingly helpful through my blog is how I've been able to deal with negative comments, because I think anybody who puts themselves out on the internet is going to come by anonymous sometimes, mostly anonymous, but negative comments. Not everyone's going to like you. I mean, that's true of any art form. You're not everyone's going to be a fan of you. And so learning to deal with those negative comments has been really, really important for me, because you have to learn to develop a thick skin. And that's why when I get a nice comment, it is nice, but I don't really take, just as much as I don't, define myself by the negative comments, I don't define myself by the good ones either. And so when I get 0 comments, which happens quite often, I don't really think like, oh, I must be doing a really horrible job. I mean, it was funny because right before my father died, I was thinking about shutting down the blog because it was so time consuming. I was like, is anyone even reading this anymore? I don't even know. Like, my comments had gone way down, and I was like, maybe I should be focusing on other things. I had tested for a show and I didn't get it, and I was realizing, oh, you know what? This is like the 3rd thing that I've tested for or like come really close to, and I didn't get it, and maybe it's because I blog. Maybe it's because I'm so out there, and maybe these studios are like afraid that I'm gonna like be blogging about their food or whatever. Like, this food sucks, Paramount, you suck, which I would never do. But maybe they thought that, and I was thinking, well, maybe I should stop this. And then my father passed away, and I surprisingly found myself blogging about it. And that day, like, I started getting these comments from people I didn't even know read my blog. I think I got like 200 and something. I still haven't actually read all of them because it's a little painful, but it just showed me like, oh, people are reading, people are tuning in, and it also made me realize that I'm not actually doing it for other people, that I'm doing it for myself, but also it's my way of communicating with my family. It was my way of communicating with my dad, because I would always call and be like, hey, and he'd be like, I know what's going on with you. I read your blog. Here's your mom. And so, for me, it's like a way for my family who doesn't really like care to talk on the phone about like the day-to-day, for them to know that like, I'm okay, everything's fine. And it was also a really important way for me to show them like, like how to interact with me about food, because that was such an important part of my recovery, was like having them not say every single time they saw me, you gained weight, you're too skinny, is that all you're gonna eat? You should eat more. You know, like this is just, I think anyone's family deals with that, but it's not until your family realizes that there's somebody in their family with a problem. It's almost like coming out to your family. Like once they know that there's someone in their family who struggles with this, they're not gonna say the same things. And that for me was incredibly helpful. And I wasn't able to say it to them to their faces. I had to use the blog as my way of doing it.
That's pretty amazing. The blogging as family therapy.
Yeah.
It's a new aspect to it. Thanks, Lynn, for being so open on this panel and also on your blogs. I think it's incredibly helpful for the readers as well. And thank you to Stephen and Patrick for being so open, just about the reasons why you guys do these things and what you get out of them. I want to move on actually to Michella, who is going to approach this, I think, from a more pragmatic point of view and kind of talk to us about, well, how do we do some of this work online?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Lynn, for sharing everything. I think before we jump on to Michelle, I think there were a couple of things that I wanted to point out. One is that there's surprising, I think, it seems somewhat counterintuitive to be open and to be vulnerable out on the internet, yet it's, I think, interesting both in the cases of what Lynn's doing, what Stephen and Patrick are doing, that willingness to do so is ultimately what actually gives you control of your own identity in that space. And I think it's also powerful because all of your and our respective identities are the sum of a much more complex set of things. And so the internet and the web allows us to, I think, claim that and to present ourselves and to be in control of how we present ourselves, which is really valuable. And I think that ties a lot into, I think, what Michella has been doing in working with creators on how to engage audiences and how to build audiences. So, Michelle, if you want to take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Thanks for having me on this panel. It's been really awesome to listen to you guys. I'm going to have to use the walkie for a second, so hold on. Can you click on the last tab on the right and hit presentation? And then hit present. Thanks. Okay, great. So I put together a little visual presentation. One of the things I was trying to get across actually in the visual presentation is I like to sort of take an approach of thinking of the ecosystem of a story. So when possible, I think when thinking about what your social media practices, what your participatory opportunities are going to be in your project, if you can think about that during concept, then that's really awesome. It doesn't always happen that way. I've certainly worked on projects where it hasn't happened that way, but I'd like to kind of discuss it from that vantage point. Because I think that my approach really is best is like if we don't think of it as just auxiliary. So if you're a filmmaker, these aren't sort of auxiliary things that you do for your film, but actually thinking about it with a more holistic perspective. So that's what I'm trying to do with this presentation. So there's that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some film projects. Film projects that I've worked on. I think they're all nonfiction projects that I've either consulted on or worked on in different levels, and kind of talk about things that I thought that they did was really interesting, how they looked at what was unique about their content, what was shareable about their content, what were other stories that they could collect to have sort of a multivocal approach to the topic or subject of their piece. So could you hit the next arrow forward, please? It's like a dance, or it's interactive. Okay, so I worked with Lynn Hirschman on her film Women Art Revolution, and so something that was really unique and strong about their project is that she had been collecting content documentation for over 30 years. So she had hundreds and hundreds of hours of women making art, interviews, stills, video. So there was all of this material that was really valuable that wasn't going to make it in the film. And a lot of documentaries are that way, right? You've got 100 plus hours of footage, and you're making an hour, 90-minute piece, et cetera. So we were thinking, like, how could we use this material during post-production? It was still production, post-production, to help sort of generate an audience around the film. With a project like that, it's very clear, like, we could look for particular audiences like art lovers, feminists, women who are interested, or just anyone who is interested in sort of the history of women in the US art context. So we made a lot of kind of raw clips, like we couldn't take too much time out of it. We had an intern and an associate producer that was like picking out these performances. We were already negotiating the rights to use the work, so we would just kind of add that in. Could we also use a clip of historical performance or something from the performance or interview to just kind of get people excited about the project? That part of it, it was the whole title of the film is War, Woman, Art, Revolution, A Secret History. So there was a lot of sort of surprise. Like, there were so many artists that were doing amazing things that I hadn't heard about. And I was also a women's studies major, and I'm an artist. So I was like, how could I have never heard about these people? But anyway, so there was something that we could sort of build on. So looking at sort of what kind of content that's part of your project that you can then share as you're in production or post-production, I think is really key and can be really valuable. And the other thing I would say about that is, like, I think sometimes you think about social media in particular as a way to sort of just promote, so you promote. But I think it's good to promote with sort of added content that has added value, that's very valuable in itself, that is something that is really interesting and fascinating on its own, and have your film sort of be the context in which you're showing that work. Okay, so, oops. Could you hit the next arrow, please? Okay, so another project, maybe some of you all are already familiar with it. It's sort of in, it's still in production, pre-production a little bit, is Geographies of Kinship, the Korean adoption story, and it's by Diane Lynn. And I worked with her. I just did some consulting about her participatory and social media strategy for the film, and she actually also did a Kickstarter, so I met with them before they started their Kickstarter. And one thing I just wanted to show, we were kind of talking about, okay, what is sort of what's at the root of the project, and what is something actually that we could get other folks to share that is similar to connected to the topic of the film. So one of the things we're kind of looking at are these photos that Diane had, her personal photos, and then other subjects in the film were these photos of, you have this photo of when folks are sharing about the Korean adoptee story, there's this photo of when you first come to the States, or you have a record number. There are these things that people who had that experience could share. And so we talked about using Tumblr, actually, because it's really easy to kind of get user-generated content and to curate it, so it's not just that folks are posting willy-nilly without your control. And there was already sort of a community that's really used to sort of sharing that way. I think a lot of people are kind of used to submitting content that way. And it's something that's easy to build. You don't have to build out this whole thing from scratch. So, oopsie. So I was just going to show you the Tumblr just really quickly. Can you click on the bigger image? Yeah. So I don't know if this is going to work, but it's just a video I took because it was just to kind of share a little bit from the Tumblr instead of going to it live. So here, here's a photo that somebody submitted, and she wrote a story about sort of her experience and what this photo sort of symbolizes. And so it's become this collection, this multi-vocal collection about the issue of the film, and it's presented in the context of the film. And actually the top image, at the time they started this, the top image was their Kickstarter campaign, and you could sort of click to their Kickstarter. So it's sort of this ecosystem and network of things that are thought together and presented together to generate an audience around, generate audience and participation around a particular subject matter, always with the context of the film. So yeah, we talked a little bit about Kickstarter, but I also, I'm like, which one do I talk to? Click on the other photo, please. Yeah. So they also had a successful Kickstarter campaign. They had 582 backers. And the thing that I would just want to point out about Kickstarter is I think that it's a great way early on to get folks to know about your project. So this is she's still in production on this project, and now she's got 582 people that could also be ambassadors for the project as she moves forward, as long as we keep active and connected to those folks. Because I think when people, especially if someone has made the step of donating to your project, I think they're going to feel invested, like they're literally invested. They're going to give you money, but also invested to see the film and to share it with folks. Like I always feel like when I've invested in a Kickstarter, like I also want to share it because you just feel more connected to the project and perhaps even to the filmmaker. I know with a lot of Kickstarters, the video or the pitch is very personal, right? You're talking as a filmmaker. Why do you want to make this why do you want to make this film? And I think that really grabs people. So so having that sort of personal approach, and then also kind of like gaining ambassadors for your project along the way. So I think that's really important about. That's another thing to point out about Kickstarter and using Kickstarter, because it's not just about fundraising, but also bringing attention and creating a community early on around your project. So exposure. Yeah. All right. Thanks. Could you hit the button back to go back? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Oops. Oh shoot, I didn't use that. But anyways, you heard me. Thank you. So there's that. Oh, thank you. And then could you hit the button forward? So this is another project I was going to talk about really briefly. So this is a pilot project for PBS. It's called Lifecasters, and it tells 3 stories. It's a pilot for a potential series, and it tells 3 stories about people who have really interesting lives. So actually, can you click on the photo that says Lifecasters, please? I'm so polite. Okay. So, tells the dramatic stories of Americans whose stories defy categorization. So we felt, again, this was something that folks could really sort of identify with. Like, there's so many stories of people that we don't get to hear that live these sort of amazing, challenging lives and have these stories to tell. So this, to us, was like a potential place to gain sort of participation around the story and enable folks to tell their own stories in the context of Lifecasters, the show. And the model was potentially this would also be a place where we could seed stories for future shows. So the thing so you kind of hear about that a lot, like getting people to sort of collect stories in the same sort of subject. But one of the things I think is really interesting, can you hit the back button? And then click on the other image, please. So what we did, which I think is pretty cool, is there are a lot of interactive story tools that are coming out now. And I think that you can think of using this either as a storyteller and using a new sort of platform to tell your story, or also a way to get people to sort of tell their stories, an easy way for people to kind of tell their stories in the same sort of subject or topic. So we used two tools that we suggested for folks. So this is a prototype, but there's a tool called Ziga and a tool it's from Mozilla, called Popcorn. And they're basically really easy web-based application interfaces where you can submit audio, submit images, have them sort of flow together in an interactive story so people can kind of navigate through them at their own pace. You can also, with Ziga, you can include Google Maps, satellite maps. So there's all these different ways you can kind of tell the story, not necessarily in the same way that you would do a documentary or a film, but it's another sort of way that you can kind of tell your story with another platform. So you could use that, I think, as a storyteller or content creator. But I think it's also it's easy enough to use to encourage other folks to create these stories that are within the world that you're creating around your film. And then that can be something that's posted or shared or a potential content source for the project in the future. So I thought that was pretty cool about the Lifecasters, and I worked with them to sort of develop that idea, and I did their web stuff. But so that was that project, and then Cool. So the other thing, just like really quickly, I wanted to talk about was just do a list of some tools, and I'm sure you recognize most of these. But the thing that I wanted to emphasize again is that like find what is really truly going to work with what is it that you're telling. So, you know, Instagram, if you're traveling, I mean, that might be a really easy way to put up content, link it to whatever your project is. That would be really interesting, travel photos or production photos, things like that. Thinking of how to use these tools that maybe we just use in our everyday lives, but also like really tailoring it towards what your creative project is. Tumblr, I mentioned Tumblr because I was talking about the adoption stories, collection of adoption stories for geographies of kinship. I also am like a big fan of a lot of the live chats that are going on. I also really like Google Hangout as a way to do sort of a live show. It can be difficult, but it's also like on the fly, and it's a way to sort of generate an audience and people sort of talking about whether it's your topic or your story. You know, this could all be fiction. I realized afterwards I focused only on nonfiction, but I think there's all of this can apply for fiction work as well. So yeah, Google Plus and Google Hangout. SoundCloud, I recently saw someone like while their film was out, they did a director's commentary and they released it on SoundCloud. So I thought that was really an innovative strategy. And then Ziga and Mozilla Popcorn were those interactive story tools that you can check out. They think they were both in beta, but now maybe they're released. So I think you can go to those sites if you just Google or whatever search engine of choice, put in Ziga or Mozilla Popcorn, and you can find those. And I think it's even great to sort of just prototype a story. Like maybe if one of the ways that you're manifesting your content or your story is a film, Ziga might be a good way to start to kind of prototype that idea. Or Popcorn. Oh, and it's also, Popcorn is really great at integrating video and creating an interactive experience. And it's pretty easy. And then just as a really practical thing, like I like to use Hootsuite to manage all of my social networks. So social networking takes a lot of time, I find. You need to be consistent. You need to think of what your voice is. I think voice is incredibly important. So Hootsuite is just a tool that allows you to like manage your Twitter and your Instagram. I think they just recently added Reddit. So you can kind of have one dashboard to manage all of that so it doesn't feel so disparate and crazy and overwhelming. So that's just a real practical tool. And then I have one just visual thing I would like to end on. Okay, yeah, so it was just time and verb. Like, I think you really need to plan and think about how much time it's going to take. With Lynn's project and with Diane's project, like, there was somebody who was on the social media. I mean, especially if you're doing a Kickstarter campaign, like, it can just kind of take over your life. And then I say verb because I think that we've talked about this, I think, with other folks on the panel, that like voice is so important. Like having sort of an authentic or genuine voice, I think is something that people really respond to. And I think having that as part of your Kickstarter video or your Twitter voice or your Facebook voice, I think is incredibly important. So yeah, think about time and verb, and that's what I have. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I think comes across from this is that it's kind of overwhelming to think about the tools that exist today as well as the ones that are being invented as we speak. Aside from that, the ways in which we tell stories is expanding as well. You can tell your story on Tumblr, you can tell your story on SoundCloud, you can tell your story through film. Is this kind of and this may be a little bit more of a personal question, but when you look at the work that you do, how much of this needs to be absorbed by the individual creators, and how much of this is creating the space for a new kind of role to exist as part of these productions? I think to a large degree, both Patrick and Stephen and Lynn are very adept at using the tools that they are using. But what you're showing us here is actually a much broader world of a whole other set of things that you've had to take on as well. So how do you see that role kind of change happening in the shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally I'm just really turned on about hearing about all the different ideas and all of the different ways to sort of tell storytelling. Like at some point in my life, I became really sort of medium agnostic. And to me, I was really interesting, like how could I tell a particular story and what tool is best for it? So I think it's great if you can kind of have a sense of what the landscape is and what's out there. So yeah, so that's sort of like my own personal approach. And I think for me, I had to have a moment where I just like got zen about it and be like, there's always going to be something new. And there may be a point in my life where I'm like, I effing don't want to learn that. I'm going to stick with whatever is still live and I'm comfortable with. But I haven't reached that point yet. So that was sort of my personal approach. But I do think that if you can't sort of get nimble or don't want to or can't get nimble about using these different tools and thinking about how can your story exist in different ways. I think there is someone that you can bring on board that is and can help you think through those things. I mean, another thing that I heard in this panel was about collaboration, and I think film has always, I feel like, always been a collaborative project, and now I think more and more so it's a collaborative project because there needs to be someone on there who can think about the story in these different ways.
It's kind of funny. I think in the tech startup world too, the ability to tell stories around what you're doing and why your service is relevant is becoming more important. And I think the structure of technology startups is actually starting to look a lot more like film productions in that sense. Mm-hmm. You see that certainly in video games, but I think across anything that is social in nature is going to run into that. To follow on to your response, I think you have the luxury of being technically adept, where you're able to build a lot of these things yourselves. And sometimes you're maybe working with a creator who is not as technically adept, and therefore that person may need an actual an expert to help them with that. Mm-hmm. But there's also, I think, a secondary issue, which is the willingness to live in public and the willingness to embrace these not as utilities, but actual forms of media in themselves. I think like a Kickstarter project, as you mentioned, is more than just a fundraising tool. It's it's a way to engage audience earlier on. It's a way to market what you're doing. In a lot of ways, I think what Patrick and Steven has done is they've created it's a mandate. It's a way to validate that there's a mandate for the creative work that you want to create. And within the project and the rewards that you decide to construct, that in itself is a form of content or a form of media too. How do you what I've seen, I think, with a lot of the creators that I've worked with, is a little bit of a reluctance to really embrace these in that matter. And what are some of the ways that you've had to coax people into not just treating these things as utilities, but to really embrace them as viable ways in which to engage with people?
I guess with my own experience, I've been really lucky. Yeah, everyone has really wanted to sort of jump in. Like, they recognize the value of using different platforms to engage with community, to grow community. I used to work at CAM. I used to be the director of digital digital and interactive media. And the organization just knew that it needed to not change directions necessarily, but broaden sort of what was the pool of what type of media were we working with, what were we showcasing, what were we funding. So, and I would say in the projects that I've talked about, those producers all saw the importance of it. So your question is, I'm sorry, how do I convince people?
Well, in cases where you find people to be reluctant, and it sounds like most of the people that you've worked with have actually been very positive in terms of their desire to embrace it.
Mm-hmm. I have sometimes, I teach too, and sometimes my students are actually reluctant to it. Like, they just don't see it as, they either see it as problematic. I get problematic a lot, like using social media, or we just had a conversation about Kickstarter in class. So, gosh, how do I convince? I mean, I guess in that case, I was like, it is how it is, and you can be a part of it. You can choose to be a part of it or not be a part of it, and if you choose not to be a part of it, I think it's going to be a struggle. So I think.
It's funny that you bring that up. I taught a class last semester to some graduate students who were designers, and part of the course that we had was this process where they had to build a service and release it to the public, and so it was less about building. Excuse me. It was a class on entrepreneurial design, and it was less about having them come up with great presentations and PowerPoints and pitching it inside and then patting everyone on the back and saying you've done a good job. They actually had to build a service and release it to the public and engage publicly. And what we found was that they were holding themselves back over the course of the semester, we started to realize what was happening. And what was happening was that they all came into this program with the identity of being a designer. And if your identity is that of a designer, you are judged basically on how beautiful and how perfect your solution is. And there's a huge hesitance to put anything out that is imperfect or considerably messy, because that just means that you're a crappy designer. And the ones who succeeded were the ones who were able to recognize that and redefine themselves, where the labels of an industrialized world were no longer the things that were relevant to them. In a networked world, having an identity of being a creator was a lot more relevant than being a designer. Design just happened to be one of the many tools that they have in their toolbox. And that's, I think, what's allowed them to succeed. And I think this question of labels across the board has been what I think Lynn is breaking and what Steve and Patrick are breaking, which is that they are defining the labels that they choose to project out. And I think that it plays into the willingness to embrace some of these services or to stick with kind of an older model. I think that as we think about these systems, just these much seemingly softer questions of how we identify ourselves and what labels we want to use can often be both our strengths and our weaknesses too. At this point, I'd love to open it up for questions for Michella or for any one of our panels. Yes.
I've got maybe a question that's more suited for the National Film Society guys. And I'm just kind of curious about, I know that with the new Google-funded channels, I know that they've been pumping like millions of dollars into original YouTube content. And do you guys feel like that's the direction of where that whole scene's going? Is to be, I guess, associated with one of these new Google-funded channels? Is it still possible to be an individual on YouTube anymore?
Take that.
I mean, I think it's hard. It sort of depends on what your goals are, and it's really hard to make a living on YouTube. And when we were starting, and we were looking at people who are have like 1 million subscribers, and we here are making like 6 figures off of like ad revenue from YouTube. It's like, oh, that would be great if we got that. And our videos get maybe like 1,000 views each, and so we're like, we would get maybe like $2 divided by 2 for that maybe. And so it's like on your own it's very difficult, right, to get that exposure, to get out there and have your work seen. But it's also, I think even some of these YouTube channels that have gotten funding haven't necessarily, not all of them are successful. Not all of them are going to get more money from YouTube to continue. So it's still, I think, in the early stages of like figuring out what works. And again, it's like goes to what your goals are and what ultimately you want to do.
And like anything else, it's just a lot of noise everywhere, and there's more and more noise every day. So I mean, the only thing you can do is if it's something that you're interested in, obviously like just hop on it and try to like elbow your way through things, and then make friends, be nice.
I think the other thing I'll add to that is that there's a luxury now because you're able to create your own formats and models that you don't necessarily have to fall into something that exists. What YouTube's doing is great, and I think there are a lot of creators out there that are going to create content that is very conducive for an advertising form of monetization. But maybe what Patrick and Steven are doing are not exactly that, yet there are other, so one way to look at it is, you said you had, thousands, a couple thousand views, and that translates very poorly from an advertising monetization strategy. How many backers did you have on Kickstarter?
806.
So 806 people contributed $15,000, which has allowed you to make what you're making. And if you're able to grow that 800, the value of those people is far exceeds the value of an individual viewer on YouTube. And maybe Kickstarter isn't the ultimate way in which you continue to fund things, but maybe you find yet other things, other services of value, or other things that are native to the work that you're doing that allows you to capture more value for individuals, but also potentially delivers more value to individuals too. So I think there's it's an incredible time to invent not just the the creative form of what you're doing, but also the entire cycle of how you sustain and bring money into that system. Any other questions? All the way in the back.
I'd like to hear you guys kind of discuss this as a topic, and specifically Karin too, because you work both in the, kind of the more mainstream traditional film world, and then we're talking about all this stuff in the media. Like in my experience, like I'm seeing right now actually more of a split. Like I think initially like a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago, we were thinking it was all gonna eventually merge, but what I'm seeing is more of a split, whereas like the people like who work kind of in the new media space are either people who are already set up, right? Like the Google channels are all handed out to like celebrities, or a lot of them are handed out to celebrities, people who are already set up. They can afford to spend time on stuff that doesn't make money, or it's the younger set who doesn't necessarily have a lot of responsibilities, financial constraints and stuff like that they have to worry about. And it seems like in the film world, it's that middle class of people who are really getting squeezed out. And so the worlds are actually becoming more divergent instead of convergent. Can you kind of talk to that?
I mean, I think you said it pretty well. That's a great point. The middle class of the film industry is being squeezed out. I was, a few months ago, I was on a conference call with a lot of the top independent producers. I mean, people have been producing for 20 years or more, kind of the marquee names. And we were having a conference call about, we were all advisors at the Sundance Producers Lab. So we were talking about, well, what are we going to tell the emerging producers today, And there's a lot of kind of internal controversy about how helpful Sundance is these days as well, because in a way it's shepherding you into a model that doesn't exist. And on the call, some of the producers were like, well, when is the $2 to $5 million film going to come back? And someone else was like, it's never coming back. And then someone else was like, well, I still haven't gotten over that. I mean, there's this middle range, like the mid-range of films where you can actually make enough money to live on, and that range is gone. I mean, 10 years ago when I started producing, you could make a first feature for $2 million. I mean, today that seems insane. I mean, you're lucky if you get $20,000 or $200,000 for it. So I think that is a problem. But I think in a way you can look at it as a huge opportunity. Like I look at what Stephen and Patrick just said about their fundraising, the analytics behind who contributed to their Kickstarter campaign. 60% of it was people they didn't know. That is amazingly positive news for someone like me, because when traditionally in independent film, when you're raising money for a first-time filmmaker, 99.9% of the time, that money is coming from friends and family. Okay, so if you're looking at a filmmaker who maybe doesn't have those connections, you're looking at a tough time. Whereas something like Kickstarter, suddenly there's another path open where the majority of the money is not coming from your friends and family.
I think the other thing I was going to add to that is that what I see Lynn and Patrick and Stephen doing that is so impressive is they're not necessarily following an industrialized model for defining who they are and building what they build. And I think the hardest thing is the fact that Lynn's blogged every day for twice a day for the past 4 years, the fact that Patrick and Stephen put out a video regularly. It seems somewhat trivial from an external perspective, but that is what's allowed them to accumulate audience over time in very, very small amounts over a long period at relatively low cost on a kind of a per effort basis. But if you aggregate all of that up, you have a huge area under the curve that you can then capitalize on once you get to the big tent poles. And I think for Patrick and Stephen, their Kickstarter project was a huge tent pole, and it's allowed them to absorb the cost without going into debt. I mean, the standard thing that we used to do is to take on a lot of debt, and then now in order to make the thing that we want to go make, and then we're stuck with this, we're stuck in debt and we're trying to make our money back. And then when we get into the mode of trying to make our money back, that limits the types of things that we can do with the thing that we made. And it pushes us down, the existing models. I invested in a film called Surrogate Valentine a couple of years ago, and the director is actually sitting in a few chairs in front of you, which I see. And one of the reasons why I invested in Dave is because he came to me and he said, last year I made a film. It cost, high six figures. I schlepped it around myself, and I'm not going to do that again. And I'm going to instead make a film that is going to have a 3-person crew, that's going to be in the low 5 digits, and this is going to give us a viable amount to make our money back, and then we'll see what the upside is. And there's the high degree of experiment, and I saw that and I loved it, and I thought this is exactly what we're seeing in the tech startup world, where because technologies have advanced, you can start to build things at a more capital efficient rate. In a capital efficient way, and you don't need as much money up front. And so there are some parallels in tech that's happening in film. And the truth is we're kind of figuring it out. And so, can you, with the skills that you have and the team that you have, cobble together something that is of interest to people that you potentially fund through a various set of ways that then set you in a position where, in addition to making money off that thing, you've also accumulated an audience of people who can continue to grow with you and evolve with you as you develop and invent other interesting things and start to figure that over time. That, I think, is a viable route for the middle that you talk about. And I definitely agree. The high end is always going to have ways to play. But the challenge is when you have something that really is not a high-end idea, trying to pursue that strategy, and then you get caught in the middle. Any other questions? More questions?
I'm actually curious, are you the person who asked the question, are you a filmmaker?
Yes.
Have you made a feature, or have you been working on a feature?
Yeah, I'm actually working with a team that did a Yes, We're Open, and we're actually kind of experimenting exactly with what Gary was talking about in terms of it being a low-cost budget, and then trying to capitalize on the cumulative fan bases of each of the individual creative talents, between Lynn and Chico and Perry and HP and Rich, and kind of seeing and it is kind of a grand experiment in a way, but to see where that net effect is at the end of the day. And since we just released yesterday, we'll see in another few months.
I think the best thing I know Rich as well, and I think one of the things I love about Rich is that he's an incredible thinker. And I think the takeaway that I hope that we all walk out of this room with is the desire to both embrace the experimentation and the desire to be public about the experimentation. I don't think anybody has an answer for how, for your hard question, which is ultimately, hey, how do we make a living and how do we put food on the table and how do we, have some sense that we are going to be able to continue in this practice that we love. But I think that through the combination of having everyone experiment and share those lessons, that maybe something will emerge out of that.
Yeah, and do you have a question? I was going to say, my big picture takeaway also, because I'm learning as we're going, and I learn a lot from just listening to Gary, which is why I love doing these panels. But part of it is just, there's so much emphasis on story development in our industry. It's all about story, story, story. The Sundance Labs are all about story, but I think that we need to look at how the cultural primacy of film, for example, has shifted. We need to look at how our priorities should shift as well. And I would argue that one thing I've learned is audience development is just as important as story development. And not just us as individual creators, but the industry and the community as a whole. We really need to start investing in audience development. It should not just be up to the people sitting up here or the people in the audience. It really has to be a community effort as well.
Gary, this question is mostly for you. I'm also involved in tech startups, and I've recently been involved with, been fascinated with the process of filmmaking and film production, primarily because of my friendship with Mai and Dave. I find it interesting that in the macroeconomic model of startup, you have tools and utilities that increase the productivity of various markets. And eventually, if you have an idea and the market can only sustain so many companies in that space, the other companies kind of get crowded out and they find other markets. And however, the GDP or the production that you end up gaining keeps continuing. But with film, there's only a limited amount of attention that each person can spend. And
the interesting difference is that if I have a startup and someone has the same idea, and one idea wins out, the other one has to go away. The other company has to go away. Whereas in a film, in the film world, if I have a film that's like Sense and Sensibility and I like it, I would actually want to see another film kind of like that. So there's not that level of competition, or they actually help each other as opposed to crowd out the consumption of each other. However, there's a limited attention span that each person can have in a day to pay to view a film. Do you see how do you see the economic differences in terms of demand and eventually the overall market for film versus, let's say, utilities or software or things that people use?
Well, I think one of the themes that you're talking about is that we live now in a completely attention inundated world, right? There are more songs being written right now as I speak than I will ever have time in my life to listen to. And so I think that, and this gets back to the YouTube question too, which is that, advertising is effectively an attention-based monetization strategy. And so if you are trying to pursue something that is effectively going to be funded by an attention-based monetization strategy, you better have the resources of a large studio or some other thing that can go in effectively and grab that. I think for most independent creators, that is not necessarily the thing that they have. And so I don't have a great answer for that. I think that leveraging Kickstarter is a great way up front to decrease the risk for yourselves. I think creating different ways of things that you can sell along the way can be promising. But yeah, I think if you are just pursuing a model where you're expecting 100% of the money that you make to come from an attention-based monetization strategy, I think that is a very hard proposition. Do you guys want to add to that?
No.
Yes.
Could you all mention some of the filmmakers that are your role models or idols, simply because as independents, nobody's waiting for Battleship Part 2 or John Carter on Mars Part 2, but everybody's waiting for the new Kevin Smith film, which he said will be his last one, the hockey movie. Your heroes as filmmakers, who are they?
Do you remember? I really like Paul Greengrass, who's done like the second and third Bourne movies, and he did United 93 and Sunday Bloody Sunday, and I like Jacques Audiard, who did The Beat That My Heart Skipped, and The Prophet, and then this new movie coming out, Rust and Bone, that's coming out, and but recently, like looking at somebody like Kevin Smith, who has like shows sort of online and on TV, and he's doing like the podcast, and he's on tour, and all of that stuff is really inspiring. And also similarly, like Morgan Spurlock is doing a lot of stuff like that as well, which is very inspiring as well.
Yeah, I mean, like my people that influenced me like early on were just, I like a lot of French New Wave films and a lot of like Cassavetes early stuff, and recently Steve McQueen. But what Steve was saying too about like Kevin Smith, I've tried to go back and like his movies, and I just don't like them. But I've heard him talk. I've met him before. He's like the funniest dude you'll ever meet. And he, to this day, like he's already said, like I don't really consider myself a filmmaker anymore. And he does the Smodcast, like he does that reality show or whatever. And so like he's somebody that is continually like doing things new and different. And for people from the film world, that guy is, he's kind of a paradigm that if there's a way you could figure out how some of the things he does fits with your personality or your constitution, then might as well try it.
I'm biased, and I mentioned this already, but I'm a big fan of Dave Boyle, who directed Surrogate Valentine last year, and which Lynn is in, and Daylight Savings, which is screening tomorrow. But it's this honestly is less of a plug. I think Dave is somebody who has straddled this world of coming from making very large films, but also who has been embracing the reality of the world that we live in, and has been very willing to take a lot of chances. And I think that his attitude towards this is really the thing that independent filmmakers should take away the most.
I honestly admire any filmmaker who can do two things. One is consistently make work, and two is consistently take risks. So there's a broad range of filmmakers that fall in there. And, I work with filmmakers who work outside of the law in China, who take a lot of risks every day. They're my heroes. I also just saw Cloud Atlas, which was made by the Wachowski brothers and Tom Twyker. That movie is insane. I cannot believe they actually raised $100 million and then made a 3-hour film that edits between 6 storylines. That's incredible. I really admire them for that. Also people on this panel, not to be corny, but Lynn for being so open about what she goes through and sharing that with us, and, putting herself on screen, both the small screen and the big screen, consistently. I think that there's not as much due given to the artists who consistently put themselves out there and take the risks that they do.
Thank you. To echo and embarrass Dave Boyle, I always talk about Dave as a filmmaker who I really admire, just because he creates content for people, for characters that he meets. It's not like he comes up with a story and then casts. He writes for the people, and I think that's part of why his movies come out as so authentic. And I just think that that's a really lovely way of combining film and fun. And really, for me, I admire filmmakers who do it because they love it, not because they're trying to, everyone's in it to try to make a living from it, but that's not the goal. Is not to do anything other than create what you love, and try to find other people who also share your passion.
That's a really hard question. I think that for me, I'm really passionate about that works, films or multimedia projects that are about sort of giving voice to voices you don't normally hear. I'm really into sort of the personal story, kind of marginalized stories. So any kind of film that's dealing with that, I think, is really important. And project that's about, again, whether it's a multivocal project, bringing attention to things that get silenced. So I don't know, it's really hard for me just to pull one person. I think especially lately, I feel like I'm ingesting media all the time. It's hard for me just to pull one or two people out.
We have time for, I think, maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Oh, great. Dave Boyle.
Well, thanks, guys. I'm really curious, as a filmmaker who's made a handful of feature films. To me, it seems like the journey of promoting and audience building for the film always seems to have sort of a shelf life that I feel like is something that's kind of artificially enforced in a way. If the movie gets a theatrical release, then up until that point, people get excited about it, and then it's just kind of, it's over. But these films, we make them and they continue to exist. And sometimes if we're lucky enough, they'll get chosen to be put on Netflix or Hulu or something where people can watch them if they so choose. But there's such a focus on the new that I feel like it's really easy for movies to kind of get left behind. And back in the old days, in the 70s, they'd dig up old movies from the 50s and show them at art houses or whatnot, and those movies, their reputation would start to grow, and those are the films that we now see on a Criterion collection or something like that. I don't feel like there's a current paradigm in the new media landscape that has that same sense of rediscovery and re-championing of movies that have already come and gone, but are still with us. It feels like the last 10 years there's been so many great movies that have come out and haven't gotten the audience that they really deserve. So I was wondering if there's anybody sort of in this new media landscape that's thinking about it in those terms, or if anybody has any ideas. or if that made any sense.
I thought that was really well put. I think there are platforms out there that are attempting to address the concern that you have. You know, like for example, you look at a site like Fandor, you know, that's which most people have not heard of, unfortunately, but they do a lot of work in trying to get content, good movies up there. But the problem I think comes down to, you know, what this gentleman brought up before, which is, and also what Gary was talking about, which is if your model is based on, you know, 100% monetization from, you know, attention, you know, gathering methods, it's really tough out there because it is a crowded field. How do you stand out? How do you get people to watch films on Fandor as opposed to just Netflix? How do you get Netflix to pick up? I mean, Netflix won't deal with independent producers. So unless you go through a aggregator / gatekeeper, how do you get onto Netflix? You know, the internet is not as democratic, I think, as most people first, you know, were talking about. So I think it is a good question. I think people out there are trying solutions. But I think the other half of the equation is about cultivating the audience. You know, are we going into high schools and, you know, encouraging high school kids to enjoy and watch independent films or foreign films? You know, I think the cultivation has to take place in a lot of different arenas.
I would say that, you know, when we were in San Francisco, we did a Saving Face reunion screening, and Saving Face came out in 2005, and it was Joan Chen, me, Michelle Kruzik, and Alice Wu all together again, and watching it with this audience. It was sold out, and it was so overwhelming, the response, that, you know, we didn't even have time to interact with the audience, and I know a lot of people were disappointed about that, but I think none of us were expecting the response that we got. And, you know, and then suddenly from that, you know, people in Alaska were asking us to do screenings and other parts of the country. And I think that, you know, as an actor, I'm very willing, as I said, I don't do anything. So I'm very willing to, like, you know, go and dig up old movies and go, you know, to these things. But I think that, you know, maybe if filmmakers would be willing to do those sorts of reunion screenings, maybe even at colleges, or do tours and stuff like that. I know that as an actor, that would be fun for me. But you know, those take time, those take money, those take effort. But that is something I would love to see as something that would start up again.
Michelle?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that for me, I feel like things are a little more accessible. I mean, I think infrastructure needs to be put in place, but there are opportunities to find films that I couldn't find before. I feel like I have sort of more access to that now, but I think the infrastructure needs to be put in place, which I think includes building audience for those films. But like for classes all the time, like I love when I can stream a film that I saw or know of from a long time ago. And so, but it's still sort of hard to find something that isn't, like you said, on either iTunes or Netflix. But yeah, Fandor is, I think, a great example. I think the National Film Board's website actually is a really great site. It has a lot of films that they've put online that are free. I mean, I know the money thing needs to be figured out, and I don't have the answer to that. And I don't think we figured that part out. Definitely not as much as like sort of the music industry is figuring some of that out. But to me, it still feels like maybe not as democratic, but still more accessible than before. Because, yeah, I'd say that.
I think this is a great question. I think you're ultimately asking about how do we discover and engage with content. And I think there are a lot of parallels in the music industry too. The one thing I would say is that I'm skeptical of institutions that are trying to emerge as new gatekeepers. So someone who's trying to follow a model of a new channel or they want to be the next MTV or they want to be the next, whatever. I don't really think that's going to work because that's a hierarchical approach. And I think that we need to take a networked approach. I think that if filmmakers own their rights and they have the ability to engage with other filmmakers, you can start to build networks of naturally kind of people who have a natural affinity for each other. That used to be how old record labels used to exist, right? Like if you were a fan of a band on Matador, you were likely to be a fan of other bands that were on Matador. If you've seen one Lynn Chen film, you probably want to see the other ones. And there are various networked ways in which we can discover things that start with creators building their own identities and claiming them and controlling the rights and engaging in a more participatory model with other creators. You think about how discovery on YouTube happens. You'll watch a video, it's a collaboration with some other person, and then you'll look them up and they have their own YouTube channel. You watch their videos and you start to engage that way. I think that people will discover things in a networked way, but I think that creators could do a lot to set themselves up to exist in that world. I think we are over time, and I'd like to thank the staff for accommodating us. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being here and sharing all their stories. Thanks.